Well, to take a little break from the war in Ukraine, let's turn now to perspective. It's almost an oxymoron, French universalism, yet it's one of the founding principles of the French Republic. In the simplest terms, it's the notion that the collective, or universal, transcends individual differences like gender, nationality, ethnicity, or religion. But for a growing chorus of voices here, that definition is increasingly exclusionary and actually contributes to the very problems that it's supposed to prevent. Well, my guest today, Mame-Fatou Niang, author and associate professor of French and Francophone studies at Carnegie Mellon University, co-authored an essay on the theme entitled Universalism. The book advocates for an anti-racist universalism that's better adapted to the realities of the 21st century. Professor Niang, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you first talk a little bit more about this conception of French universalism, because it may differ from the way that people elsewhere in the world, and certainly me as an American, understand it?
Absolutely. So we're talking here about the foundation of the Republic. How do we build what we call in French l'en commun, the idea of being together? And this togetherness in French is kind of interesting because it's togetherness in oneness. Frenchness is one and indivisible. It cannot be hyphenated with ethnicity. It cannot be hyphenated with race. It cannot be hyphenated with religion, right? Francité et la francité et la francité. So the idea that builds universalism, you know, and those foundations like of the Republic, like liberté, égalité, fraternité, are amazing. I mean, who doesn't want freedom? Who doesn't want equality? Who doesn't want brotherhood? But what we realized is that increasingly these values do not apply to everybody. And actually, from the inception of these values, from the revolution of 1789, they did not apply to everybody because slavery, the institution of slavery, existed, you know, when these values were founded. Women were not allowed to vote. Women were not allowed to hold property. Poor people could not vote. So the suffrage universel was not actually universal. So the idea is that we really have to focus on the words and see this project as a project, something that is to be built, something that has to be adapted to its time, and not, you know, like a treasure that has to be stored in a museum and protected from those who want to change it.
So what does universalism mean to you, and how is it different than the definition here in France that's kind of dominated historically? I know in your book here, Universalism, you make a distinction between universalists and what you describe as pseudo-universalists. Can you expand upon that?
So in the book, Julien and I, my co-author, talk of pseudo-universalism. So the way these values, the way this project has been turned inside out to become actually based on an exclusion, to become an exclusionary project. To be universalist is becoming more and more not to be this, not to be that, and not to let people, to give people the liberty to actually be who they are. And I'm using the word be in the sense of être, right? And what the reflection that Julien and I had on this project was to really starting from the being, starting from the people, starting from the citizens, the individual, how can we rethink this project? And going back to, you know, the definition of openness, of dialogue that really are the foundation of democracy, try to bring back this idea of a republic and bring back a project that takes into account not only its times, because it's really, it has become just impossible. And the events of the past 2 years following the tragic death of George Floyd had really shed a light on that. It has become impossible for France in 2022 to live on these values that for most of them were crafted right after the revolution, were crafted by the Third Republic, were crafted by a system that were born out of colonization, a system that were born out of exploitation, and a system that defined itself by belittling others by virtue of their color or religion or supposed lack of civilization. So for us, we really just got together and threw together 94 pages to rethink, to open something that we think we're increasingly losing, the art of debate, the art of not wanting to always be right, but the art of, you know, putting my word and trying to see how they can meet with yours and really try to rethink, to rebuild a project that we think is a good one. We don't want to throw the baby dirty with the dirty water, because there is something good to La République. There is something good to universalism. It's just that it's been hijacked.
In what ways do you see it being hijacked today in 2022? How does this kind of exclusionary universalism that you speak of manifest itself?
When you think of universalism, and and one of the thing that is very important, one of the elements that is very important for us is how we cite Césaire, for example, rethinking a humanism that's really adapted to its time. And one of the ways that universalism today in France is hijacked, it's really the refusal to have it live with its time, to have it mirror the people of France today. France in 2022 is no way like France in 1950, or the France of Napoleon, or the France of Jules Ferry. So why should we have these new people be subjected to the same laws that for many of them, if they are of a different creed or different color, were used to belittle them and make them feel like they were other citizens or second citizen. So the way, and we see it in many of the debates that are polluting the public space, debates around wokeism, around Islamo-gauchism, and this idea that anybody who wants to critique, anybody who wants to highlight the faults, anybody who wants to highlight the weaknesses of this system, because highlighting the weakness of the system is a way to seeing the growth potential, but really seeing that anybody who is critiquing the system is now accused of being an intellectual terrorist, is accused of being a separatist, is accused of being to bring the republic down. And increasingly, the exclusionary definition of universalism to be where universalism, and the republic becomes this colored. To be French is to be white. But because we are in a country where we don't talk about race, we don't talk about color, we are in this weird, really, rhetorical void where the words completely lose their meanings, completely lose their sense. And that's what Julia and I wanted to do in this very short book, to bring back the word to their essences, bring back the art of dialogue, and see how we can really rethink this project, because it's a good one.
Okay, Professor Niang, I'm so sorry. We unfortunately have to leave it there. But thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.